Replicability. Is it necessary in the production of knowledge? If you're considering whether replicability is necessary in the production of knowledge, you're going to want to think about the nature of replicability. Replicability of what? By whom and for what purpose? Which takes us on to the second idea in this title, the idea of necessity. Necessary for what elements of the production of knowledge, and necessary for what outcomes in the production of knowledge. I would recommend exploring the nature of replicability and necessity within each area of knowledge considered, rather than writing definitions at the beginning of the essay. You, of course, are free to choose any two areas of knowledge that take your interest. The two that I would choose are the arts and natural sciences. I choose these because they give us a good contrast in the argument. In area of knowledge, the arts, my main two arguments are, firstly, the role of interpretation, and secondly, the relationship between the artist and the audience in the production of knowledge. In area of knowledge, natural sciences, the first argument that I would be around the practicable achievability of replicability in methodology. And secondly, it would be about theory versus application of natural scientific knowledge. It must be noted today that these are just arguments that I have chosen to make. There are many, many different arguments that you could choose to reflect upon the nature of necessity of replicability in the areas of knowledge that you choose to look at. This is just my way of looking at it. You are free to choose your own way of looking at it. So let's look at those arguments in a bit more detail, and let's go back to area of knowledge, the arts. The first argument here is around the role of interpretation. So here I'd be looking at whether replicability is possible in the interpretation of artistic knowledge, and this argument has two main strands. The first being how the artist interprets their intention into the creation of a production of artistic knowledge. And when they do this, can they replicate it successively and successfully in the production of artistic knowledge? Do they need to replicate it successively and successfully in the production of artistic knowledge? Here you'll be looking at whether the application of standardised interpretation is a necessary part of the production of knowledge in ToK the arts. And you would start to get into how you define what is necessary before the production of knowledge in the arts. And one of the ways I like to think of this is to contrast that which is deemed necessary with that which is deemed merely to be sufficient. Now, to link this first argument to the second argument, which is looking at the role or interplay between the artist and the audience. Now, a slight note of caution here. We don't want to get sidetracked into a discussion about whether the artist or the audience's interpretation is more accurate. What we're interested in is the role of replication in the production of artistic knowledge. Now, it could be argued that artistic knowledge is constructed for the audience, and as such, is replication necessary so that the audience gets a standardised and expected experience? i.e., is the audience contingent upon the replication of the processes of the production of artistic knowledge? On the other hand, it could be argued that if the functions of artistic knowledge is merely the expression of the artist's intention, then replication is not necessary and may not even be sufficient. In evaluation here, we could start to argue that replication is not practical in the production of artistic knowledge because the audience's interpretation is not predictable. We could also argue that replicability is a limitation placed upon the expression of the artist. Moving on to the natural sciences. A useful point to begin here might be to discuss that the method of the natural sciences is to achieve maximum replicability in order to maximise reliability as a component of objectivity. However, my first argument would be to look at whether such replicability is actually achievable in the production of knowledge in the natural sciences. Firstly, we have all of the methodological constraints of controlling variables and conditions and the human subjectivity that scientists bring to their research, but we also need to look at the production of knowledge which may occur with infrequently occurring events, which could use, for example, natural experiments. Moving on to the second argument in the natural sciences, I would look at the idea of the construction of theory versus the application of scientific knowledge. Both are central in the production of scientific knowledge. Again, we are looking at the functions of the production of knowledge in this AOK. So going back to what replicability might be necessary for, what we're really looking at is what is the function of scientific knowledge? Why do we produce scientific knowledge? Essentially, the argument here is that replicability might be highly desirable when producing theoretical knowledge, but if the aim of that theoretical knowledge is to be applied in the real world, then for most scientific discoveries, you could argue that replicability is absolutely necessary. And you could usefully draw upon examples from biomedical sciences or from engineering to illustrate the importance of reliable data arising from replicable experiment designs. Just imagine if the design of an aircraft wasn't reliable because the methods used to produce it were not replicable, then you wouldn't want to get on that aircraft. Moving on to some possible evaluation points in the natural sciences. We might be looking at whether the knowledge can be produced without replicability, and we could usefully draw real-life examples such as the accidental discovery of knowledge and the serendipitous discovery of knowledge to show that replicability is not always necessary in the production of knowledge in the natural sciences. We might also be interested in looking at the role of categorization and classification in the definition of knowledge in the natural sciences as a component of the production of knowledge. The argument here being that categorization and classification can hinder the accuracy and therefore the applicability of knowledge production. Finally, we should look at the implications of some of the arguments which are outlined here today. I might be interested in whether replicability is related to the establishment of a hierarchy of knowledge within that area of knowledge, and finally the relationship between irregular or erratic knowledge outcomes and the regularized structures which lead to replicability within that area of knowledge. These notes are a very rough approximation of the far more detailed notes which are available on the ToK Today website. If you want more help with your ToK essay, then make sure to check out the student support pages on toktoday.com. And if you want even more help, then email me at daniel@toktoday.com. I hope that you found this useful, and stay ToKtastic.